This is Christopher Howery of Notarius. I'm going to go over wiring up and doing the RX-TX boards starting from scratch. First thing you're going to want to do is remove this antenna connection screw. I'm just going to use a pair of pliers. It's not necessary for us to keep this unit because we'll get rid of this antenna connection later. So I'm just going to use the pliers to loosen it. Once it's loose, I will unscrew that. I'm going to move these into my trash bin, knock off any loose parts, throw it in here. Next thing you want to do is actually remove this sticker panel and this panel on each side. I always use a knife, but a flathead screwdriver is also acceptable. Pry it up a little bit, enough to reach underneath, and slowly pull the rest of this off. Exercise caution while doing this. You don't want to damage anything inside. I'm going to do the same thing on this side. I'm going to go for the side with a little more meat on it. Once again, pry it up, being careful of anything that's inside. Oh, it snapped. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take my knife again and just pry this out kind of around to get it off. Now that this stuff has been removed, there are 4 screws. You want to remove all 4 of these screws to remove this outer panel that's in position. So I'm going to start on this side. Remove these 2. Then this outer panel, if you grab like this and pull, it should slide right off. You want to do the same thing on this side. Alright, I've now removed all of those. The next thing I want to do before continuing is I want to put some hot glue right here on this antenna connection. This uses a micro soldered joint. It's literally just pressed right down on there. So to ensure that this does not come off, we'll put hot glue across this. Not enough to get on this antenna connection here, but enough to hold this chip in place. So I'm going to take my hot glue gun and dab it across like so. I kind of blew on it a little bit, so hopefully you can see it better. As you can see though, there's enough hot glue on this so that way it is holding it in place, but it's not actually going to hold this connection. Now we're going to give this a minute for the hot glue to dry. Now that I've allowed this hot glue to dry, we're going to remove these side panels. And those can just go into the trash. We're going to remove this top sticker here. There's a little black button here. You want to remove that as well. Now that that's been removed, we're going to gently push out this antenna. There's thermal paste on top of it, so we're going to take a rag, dry rag, nothing's on it, and we're just going to wipe away all this excess thermal paste. Now that that's been wiped off, we'll remove the rest of the chip from the casing. At this point, the casing can be thrown away. And we're going to take our hot glue gun again, and we're going to glue around the sides of this connector, just to ensure that the antenna does not come off. Once again, make sure you don't put any glue anywhere on this other UFL connector, because we'll be removing that later to attach one of our own antennas. I'm now going to set this to the side to dry. So now that the glue on my antenna has dried, we want to remove this green connection right here. The easiest way to go about removing this is just to take a pair of snippers and just cut at it and kind of pull. Be gentle so you don't break the chip, but if you cut the top off, you can access the pins, and once you have access to the pins, you can just desolder them. So your goal is to remove this so you can access this. It's a time-consuming task, so I'm going to skip ahead till I have this removed. Now that I've removed my green cover, as you can see, it was kind of maliciously just pulled apart until it finally came off. I can desolder these pins. I want to be careful when I'm doing this. I'm first going to mount it onto this stand, and I'm going to adjust it so that I have a clear view of the bottom of these pins. The next thing I'm going to do is I'm going to take my soldering pen and a pair of crimpers. Very carefully, I'm going to heat up the solder that's here, and I'm just going to pull that pin out. And I'm going to repeat this for all of these. Alright, now that those have been removed, I'm going to sit my board up kind of straight, and I'm actually going to heat up each of these solder junctions that are in here to give you a slightly clearer view of it. I'm going to heat up each of these, and I'm going to plunge them out from this side. So once again, tighten this down onto here. So I will grab my plunger now. I'm going to heat up my first lead, place the plunger on the opposite side of it, and when I click, it'll suck it clean. I'm going to do this with all of them.
This just need to be received at any point.
So next thing you want to do is make sure that all the solder has been removed from these joints. To do that, just look through the joint and make sure you can see through it. As you can see, my thumb is showing in those little spots. Now that that's been taken care of, I'm going to fold this down like so and take two 2-pin Molexes, just like this. I'm going to turn them so that this tab is facing inside the board or toward the antenna. And I'm going to install one of them on the last two on the end, and the other one on the furthest in. So you will, of these 5 locations, the middle one will have no connection to it. Alright, with both of these connections now on, I'm just going to flip this over onto the opposite side and dab a little bit of solder on each. So now these are soldered into position on my board, and as you can see, my tabs on both of them are coming this way toward my antenna connection. At this point, I could remove this UFL connection. It's no longer really necessary, and I can toss that. The last component that we'll need to remove is one of the very small LEDs on this side. You want to go for the one closest to this edge. In order to do this, we're going to install this board onto our mount. It is highly suggested that you use the magnifying glass microscope recorder for this. Adjust so that way you can clearly see the LED. So now that I've mounted this properly, I'm gonna just see if I can't get a clearer view with my microscope. All right. Now I want to take some flux and I want to place it on top of this LED light. Obviously you want enough to cover that, but not too much that you can't see what you're doing. And if you ever need more, you can always add a little more. I am using a very fine tipped soldering pen, so I've had to adjust, change to the other pen. And now, using the microscope, the flux and the soldering pen, melt both sides. Desolder both sides of the LED and gently push it while you're doing this, so that way the LED comes off. Now that it has come off, take a rag and gently wipe away any excess flux and check and make sure that none of these contacts have come off. It looks like I'm good. I got a little bit of the rag in the way, so I want to remove that. Yep, I'm good. Alright, now that that's complete, I want to attach 2 flailing leads to this LED, so that way I can attach my pair light. To do that, I'm going to use nano wire. Alright, so I'm going to use my nano wire. I've cut in a small piece already, and what I'll do, put up my flux real quick, is I'm going to take this nano wire and I'm going to put a little bit of solder on the tip. Now that I've done that, I'll take a little bit more solder and I'm going to put it on the pad closest to the other LED. So I'm starting with my positive, so I'm using the red wire. And I'm going to place my red wire on top of that LED pad and heat up its solder again. On both the wire and the pad. to make a good clean connection. And I want to make sure by kind of moving my microscope over it that that connection is only connected to that pad. Now that I've checked that, I'm going to come over to my black wire for my ground, and I'm going to do that again. I'm going to put some onto my wire, solder some onto my pad, and take my black cable, set it down on top of this, now once again I want to make sure that these two leads are not touching each other and that there are no issues with it. And what I'm going to do once I've confirmed that is take my hot glue gun and I'm going to put a dab of hot glue on these connections. Alright, the next thing we're going to want to do is attach our video cables. I've taken 2 short jumpers. I've already soldered the ends to them and cut off a little portion of it. I've also taken my connection and I've soldered onto this side, the front two, a little bead of solder on the front 2 connections. Again, using my microscope, I'm going to position this right up underneath of it. Black goes on to the front one. And yellow goes onto the one right behind that. Once again, make sure that these two do not touch as far as your soldering goes. Before proceeding onto the back where I will solder in the pair button, I'm also going to come to my little switch here and I'm going to turn 2 into the on position. So my dip switch is now going to look like this. I'm then going to flip this over and I'm going to solder 2 connections, 2 wires onto my pair button, and I'm not going to remove my pair button. So I've grabbed my wires, which I just prepped. I've put a little bit of solder on both ends. I'm now going to put some solder onto my connections where my pair button goes. And I'm going to take each cable and solder it on. Now that that's been done, I'm going to take a little bit of hot glue and I'm going to dab it onto each of these connections that I've just done. And I'm going to glue my switch so it stays in the position I just put it in. This concludes the video on how to prep one of these RX and TX boards.